The Book of Daniel is an account of the activities and visions of Daniel, a noble Jew exiled at Babylon. In the Hebrew Bible it is found in the Ketuvim, while in Christian Bibles it is grouped with the major prophets. The book divides into two parts. A set of 6 court tales in chapters 1 to 6, followed by 4 apocalyptic visions in chapters 7 to 12. The Apocrypha contains 3 additional stories. The Song of the Three Holy Children, Susanna, and Bel and the Dragon, traditionally ascribed to Daniel himself. Modern scholarly consensus considers the book pseudonymous. The stories of the first half legendary in origin, and the visions of the second the products of anonymous authors in the Maccabean period. Its message is that just as the God of Israel saved Daniel and his friends from their enemies, so he would save all of Israel in their present oppression. Its influence has resonated through later ages, from the Dead Sea Scrolls community and the authors of the Gospels and Revelation, to various movements from the 2nd century to the Protestant Reformation and modern millennialist movements, on whom it continues to have a profound influence. Literary structure, genre and language divisions. The literary structure of the Book of Daniel is marked by 3 prominent features. The most fundamental is a genre division between the court tales of chapters 1 to 6 and the apocalyptic visions of 7 to 12. The second is a language division between the Hebrew of chapters 1 and 8 to 12, and the Aramaic of chapters 2 to 7. This language division is reinforced by the chiastic arrangement of the Aramaic chapters. Various suggestions have been made by scholars to explain the fact that the genre division does not coincide with the other two. However, the most reasonable proposal is that put forward by Collins. The language division and concentric structure of chapters 2 to 6 are artificial literary devices designed to bind the two halves of the book together. It should also be noted that the time settings of chapters 1 to 6 show a progression from Babylonian to Median times, which is repeated in chapters 7 to 12. The following outline is provided by John J. Collins in his commentary on Daniel. Part 1. Tales 1. Introduction. 2. Nebuchadnezzar's Dream of 4 Kingdoms. 3. The Fiery Furnace. 4. Nebuchadnezzar's Madness. 5. Belshazzar's Feast. 6. Daniel in the Lion's Den. Part 2. Visions. 7. The Beasts from the Sea and the Son of Man. 8. The Ram and the He-Goat. 9. Interpretation of Jeremiah's prophecy of the 70 weeks. 10. The Angel's Revelation. Kings of the North and South. Chiastic structure. In the Aramaic section there is a clear chiasm in the chapter arrangement of the Aramaic section. The following is taken from Paul Reddit's Introduction to the Prophets. A1. A Dream of 4 Kingdoms replaced by a 5th. B1. Daniel's 3 friends in the fiery furnace. C1. Daniel interprets a dream for Nebuchadnezzar. C2. Daniel interprets the handwriting on the wall for Belshazzar. B2. Daniel in the lion's den. A2. A vision of 4 world kingdoms replaced by a 5th. Content. Induction in Babylon. In the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim of God allows Jerusalem to fall into the power of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Young Israelites of noble and royal family, without physical defect, and handsome, versed in wisdom and competent to serve in the palace of the king, are taken to Babylon to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Among them are Daniel and his 3 companions, who refuse to touch the royal food and wine for fear of defilement. Their overseer fears for his life in case the health of his charges deteriorates. But Daniel suggests a trial and the 4 emerge healthier than their counterparts from 10 days of nothing but vegetables and water. They are allowed to continue to refrain from eating the king's food, and to Daniel God gives insight into visions and dreams. When the training is done, Nebuchadnezzar finds them 10 times better than all the wise men in his service and therefore keeps them at his court, where Daniel continues until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Nebuchadnezzar's Dream of 4 Kingdoms. In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar is troubled by a dream, and demands that his wise men tell him its content. When the wise men protest that this is beyond the power of any man, he sentences all, including Daniel and his friends, to death. Daniel receives an explanatory vision from God. Nebuchadnezzar had seen an enormous statue with a head of gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of mixed iron and clay, then saw the statue destroyed by a rock that turned into a mountain, filling the whole earth. Daniel explains the dream to the king. The statue symbolized 4 successive kingdoms, starting with Nebuchadnezzar, all of which would be crushed by God's kingdom, which would endure forever. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the supremacy of Daniel's God, raises him over all his wise men, and places him and his companions over the province of Babylon. The fiery furnace. Daniel's companions Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow to King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue and are thrown into a fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar is astonished to see a 4th figure in the furnace with the 3. 1. With the appearance like a son of the gods, so the king called the 3 to come out of the fire, and blessed the God of Israel, and decreed that any who blasphemed against him should be torn limb from limb. Nebuchadnezzar's madness. Nebuchadnezzar recounts a dream of a huge tree that is suddenly cut down at the command of a heavenly messenger. Daniel is summoned and interprets the dream. The tree is Nebuchadnezzar himself, who for 7 years will lose his mind and live like a wild beast. All of this comes to pass until, at the end of the specified time, Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges that heaven rules, and his kingdom and sanity are restored. Belshazzar's feast. Belshazzar and his nobles blasphemously drink from sacred Jewish temple vessels, offering praise to inanimate gods, until a hand mysteriously appears and writes upon the wall. The horrified king summons Daniel, who upbraids him for his lack of humility before God and interprets the message. Belshazzar's kingdom will be given to the Medes and Persians. Belshazzar rewards Daniel and raises him to be 3rd in the kingdom, and that very night Belshazzar is slain and Darius the Mede takes the kingdom. Daniel in the lion's den. Darius elevated Daniel to high office, exciting the jealousy of other officials. Knowing of Daniel's devotion to his God, his enemies tricked the king into issuing an edict forbidding worship of any other god or man for a 30-day period. Daniel continues to pray 3 times a day to God towards Jerusalem. He is accused, and King Darius, forced by his own decree, throws Daniel into the lion's den. But God shuts up the mouths of the lions, and the next morning Darius rejoiced to find him unharmed. The king casts Daniel's accusers into the lion's pit together with their wives and children to be instantly devoured, while he himself acknowledges Daniel's God as he whose kingdom shall never be destroyed. Vision of the beasts from the sea. In the 1st year of Belshazzar, Daniel has a dream of 4 monstrous beasts arising from the sea. The 4th, a beast with 10 horns, devours the whole earth, treading it down and crushing it. And a further small horn appears and uproots 3 of the earlier horns. The Ancient of Days judges and destroys the beast, and, one like a son of man, is given everlasting kingship over the entire world. A divine being explains that the 4 beasts represent 4 kings, but that the holy ones of the Most High would receive the everlasting kingdom. The 4th beast would be a 4th kingdom with 10 kings, and another king who would pull down 3 kings and make war on the holy ones, for a time, 2 times and a half, after which the heavenly judgment will be made against him, and the holy ones will receive the everlasting kingdom. Vision of the ram and goat. In the 3rd year of Belshazzar, Daniel has vision of a ram and goat. The ram has 2 mighty horns, one longer than the other, and it charges east and west and north, overpowering all other beasts. A goat with a single horn appears from the west and destroys the ram. The goat becomes very powerful until the horn breaks off and is replaced by 4 lesser horns. A small horn that grows very large. It stops the daily temple sacrifices and desecrates the sanctuary for 2,300 evening and mornings until the temple is cleansed. The angel Gabriel informs him that the ram represents the Medes and Persians, the goat is Greece, and the little horn is a wicked king. Vision of the 70 weeks in the first year of Darius the Mede. Daniel meditates on the word of Jeremiah that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. He confesses the sin of Israel and pleads for God to restore Israel and the desolated sanctuary of the temple. The angel Gabriel explains that the 70 years stand for 70 weeks of years, during which the temple will first be restored, then later defiled by prince who is to come, until the decreed end is poured out. Vision of the kings of North and South. Daniel chapter 10. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, Daniel sees in his vision an angel who explains that he is in the midst of a war with the prince of Persia, assisted only by Michael, your prince. The prince of Greece will shortly come, but first he will reveal what will happen to Daniel's people. Daniel chapter 11. A future king of Persia will make war on the king of Greece. A mighty king will arise and wield power until his empire is broken up and given to others. And finally the king of the south will go to war with the king of the north. After many battles, a contemptible person will become king of the north. This king will invade the south 2 times. The first time with success, but on his second he will be stopped by ships of Kittim. He will turn back to his own country, and on the way his soldiers will desecrate the temple, abolish the daily sacrifice, and set up the abomination of desolation. He will defeat and subjugate Libya and Egypt. But reports from the east and north will alarm him, and he will meet his end between the sea and the holy mountain. Daniel chapter 12. At this time Michael will come. It will be a time of great distress, but all those whose names are written will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. In the final verses the remaining time to the end is revealed. A time, times and half a time. Daniel fails to understand and asks again what will happen, and is told, from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. Additions to Daniel. The Greek text of Daniel is considerably longer than the Hebrew, due to 3 additional stories. The prayer of Azariah and Song of the 3 Holy Children, placed after Daniel chapter 3 verse 23. The story of Susanna and the elders, placed before chapter 1 in some Greek versions and after chapter 12 in others. The story of Bel and the dragon, placed at the end of the book. The additions to Daniel were accepted by all branches of Christianity until the Protestant movement rejected them in the 16th century on the basis that they were absent from Hebrew Bibles. They remain in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles. Historical background. The visions of chapters 7 to 12 reflect the crisis which took place in Judea in 167-164 BCE when Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the Greek king of the Seleucid Empire, threatened to destroy traditional Jewish worship in Jerusalem. When Antiochus came to the throne, the Jews were largely pro-Seleucid. The high priestly family was split by rivalry, and one member, Jason, offered the king a large sum to be made high priest. Jason also asked, or more accurately, paid, to be allowed to make Jerusalem a polis, or Greek city. This meant, among other things, that city government would be in the hands of the citizens, which meant in turn that citizenship would be a valuable commodity, to be purchased from Jason. None of this threatened the Jewish religion, and the reforms were widely welcomed, especially among the Jerusalem aristocracy and the leading priests. 3 years later Jason was deposed when another priest, Menelaus, offered Antiochus an even larger sum for the post of high priest. Antiochus invaded Egypt twice, in 169 BCE with success, but on the second incursion, in late 168, he was forced to withdraw by the Romans. Jason, hearing a rumor that Antiochus was dead, attacked Menelaus to take back the high priesthood. Antiochus drove Jason out of Jerusalem, plundered the temple, and introduced measures to pacify his Egyptian border by imposing complete Hellenization. The Jewish book of the law was prohibited, as was circumcision, and on the 15th of December 167 an abomination of desolation, probably a Greek altar, was introduced into the temple. With the Jewish religion now clearly under threat, a resistance movement sprang up, led by the Maccabee brothers, and over the next 3 years it won sufficient victories over Antiochus to take back and purify the temple. The crisis which the author of Daniel addresses is the destruction of the altar in Jerusalem in 167 BCE. The daily offering, which used to take place twice a day, at morning and evening, stopped, and the phrase, evenings and mornings, recurs through the following chapters as a reminder of the missed sacrifices. But whereas the events leading up to the sacking of the temple in 167 and the immediate aftermath are remarkably accurate, the predicted war between the Syrians and the Egyptians never took place, and the prophecy that Antiochus would die in Palestine was inaccurate. The conclusion is that the account must have been completed near the end of the reign of Antiochus but before his death in December 164, or at least before news of it reached Jerusalem. Composition. Development. It is generally accepted that Daniel originated as a collection of Aramaic court tales later expanded by the Hebrew revelations. The court tales may have originally circulated independently, but the edited collection was probably composed in the 3rd or early 2nd century BC. The first stage may have consisted of the stories in chapters 4 to 6, as these differ quite markedly in the Septuagint. When the full collection was assembled, it is likely that the brief Aramaic introduction of chapter 1 was composed to provide historical context, introduce the characters of the tales, and explain how Daniel and his friends came to Babylon. In the third stage, the visions of chapters 7 to 12 were added and chapter 1 was translated into Hebrew. Authorship. Daniel is one of a large number of Jewish apocalypses, all of them pseudonymous. Although the entire book is traditionally ascribed to Daniel the seer, chapters 1 to 6 are in the voice of an anonymous narrator. Except for chapter 4, which is in the form of a letter from King Nebuchadnezzar, only the second half is presented by Daniel himself, introduced by the anonymous narrator in chapters 7 and 10. The real author, editor of Daniel was probably an educated Jew, knowledgeable in Greek learning, and of high standing in his own community. The book is a product of wisdom circles, but the type of wisdom is mantic rather than the wisdom of learning. The main source of wisdom in Daniel is God's revelation. It is possible that the name of Daniel was chosen for the hero of the book because of his reputation as a wise seer in Hebrew tradition. Ezekiel, who lived during the Babylonian exile, mentioned him in association with Noah and Job as a figure of legendary wisdom, and a hero named Daniel features in a late 2nd millennium myth from Ugarit. The legendary Daniel, known from long ago but still remembered as an exemplary character, serves as the principal human hero in the biblical book that now bears his name. Daniel is the wise and righteous intermediary who is able to interpret dreams and thus convey the will of God to humans, the recipient of visions from on high that are interpreted to him by heavenly intermediaries. Dating Daniel's exclusion from the Hebrew Bible's canon of the prophets, which was closed around 200 BCE, suggests it was not known at that time, and the wisdom of Sirach, from around 180 BCE, draws on almost every book of the Old Testament except Daniel, leading scholars to suppose that its author was unaware of it. Daniel is, however, quoted by the author of a section of the Sibylline oracles commonly dated to the middle of the 2nd century BCE, and was popular at Qumran beginning at much the same time, suggesting that it was known and revered from the middle of that century. The prophecies contained in the book are accurate down to the career of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, king of Syria and oppressor of the Jews. but not in its prediction of his death. The author seems to know about Antiochus' two campaigns in Egypt, the desecration of the temple, and the fortification of the Accra, but he seems to know nothing about the reconstruction of the temple or about the actual circumstances of Antiochus' death in late 164. Chapters 10 to 12 must therefore have been written between 167 and 164 BCE. There is no evidence of a significant time lapse between those chapters and chapters 8 and 9, and chapter the 7th may have been written just a few months earlier again.